God is still on the throne, and prayer changes things. This is Brother Hutchings inviting the listeners to another Watchman on the Wall program of Southwest Radio Ministries. And here now is Brother Jerry.
Beginning today and continuing through Friday, Brother Hutchings will be talking with Tom Horn and Chris Putnam about books they've co-authored about the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican. Both men are established writers and have spent hundreds of hours researching the subject matter. Their first book was Petrus Romanus, and most of today's broadcast will be devoted to that. Tomorrow they'll get into a new book titled Exo Vaticana. Here's Brother Hutchings with more information about Tom Horn and Chris Putnam.
Thank you, Brother Jerry. They authored the book that we offered, Petrus Romanus. It concerns the prophecy of the Pope that a priest by the name of Malachi prophesied. I think it was in 1139 A.D. We've had a tremendous response to the book. Would one of you gentlemen tell us, maybe some listening who are listening maybe for the first time or at least not familiar with the prophecy of the popes made almost 1,000 years ago?
Yeah, that's right, Brother Hutchings. That was published in 1139, or it was written down in 1139, and it is by tradition ascribed to St. Malachi O'Morgair, or who the Catholics more commonly just call St. Malachi or St. Malachi. He was a bishop in what is now thought of as Northern Ireland, who in 1139 went to Rome. He met with the Pope at that time, which was Pope Innocent II, and conducted church business. And he was very burdened by a lot of what he saw in Rome. The opulence of the Vatican and the robes and all that stood in stark contrast to all of the hurting and poor people that he had saw on his trip across Europe. And so he's very troubled. And he's coming up out of the Vatican City. He's conducted his business now, and he's leaving. And on a hill, coming up out of the seven-hilled city, something happens to him. He sees a vision. He sees a vision of every pope that would exist from that time until the final pope, who would be the pope when the church entered into the Great Tribulation period, according to their doctrine. And so he writes down a series of 112 lines in Latin, each one of these being a motto or a reference that said something about what that pope would be in succession. So from Pope Celestine II to the final pope, who he named Petrus Romanus. And what makes this important is it's a 900-year-old Catholic prophecy. Now, I'm not a Catholic, and this is not a biblical prophecy. It's an extra-biblical prophecy, so we don't put it on a par with the authority of the Bible. But if for no other reason than its historic value, you now have a 900-and-some-year-old medieval prophecy that has reached its final line. The Pope who was just elected, George Bergoglio, who took the name Pope Francis, he is the final Pope, number 112, which is identified by the Latin phrase Petrus Romanus.
Brother Chris, how does the resignation of Pope Benedict figure into all this?
Well, no, that was one of the really surprising things that gave our book a new life. You know, we wrote, and our book came out April 2012, last year, and, based on some rumors that had been going on. There was a Vatican Insider website that was talking about Pope Benedict's failing health and rumors that he could even possibly step down, but hardly anyone was taking that seriously. And in our research into this St. Malachi prophecy, I had read a lot of different books by different scholars, some who were critical of it, some who believed it. One that really believed it was Father René Thibault. He was a Belgian university professor, and he wrote a book called The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes in French that I translated. And he actually predicted that the final pope would arrive in April of 2012. Now, that was a pretty bold claim, considering that his book had a copyright date of 1951. Now, he also found all kinds of encryption codes and just all kinds of anagrams and fanciful things that all seem to point to the year 2012 is when the final pope would arrive, based on the Latin text of this Malachi prophecy. So we put all that in our book, and we talked about it. We just kind of left it up in the air and saying, well, if this guy's right, then we expect to see this happening right as our book came out in April. So, you can imagine we were rushing to get it done into the printer because we figured if it really did happen, nobody would believe us unless we had it out in print before the events happened. Well, of course, the year 2012 came and went, and nothing really happened. So, we just figured that Father Thibault was incorrect, but there's enough in our book that addresses other issues where that really didn't ruin our book by any means, so we weren't that worried about it. But then February 11th, Pope Benedict announces to the world that he is going to step down, and this created quite a stir. Lightning struck St. Peter's Basilica that night. There's actually a video you can watch even at the Weather Channel with a bolt of lightning landing right on St. Peter's. Just hours after he made the announcement. That really seems significant. But the thing that was most significant is that day, that he makes this huge announcement. I was reading the New York Times, and I actually have it right here in front of me, and I'll just read a little section from what the New York Times said. Quote, that the resignation was long in the planning was confirmed by the editor of the Vatican newspaper, who wrote Monday that the Pope's decision was taken many months ago after his trip to Mexico and Cuba in March of 2012 and kept with a reserve that no one could violate, end quote. So right there in the New York Times, it's saying that Pope Benedict made the decision to step down at the end of March of 2012, exactly when this Belgian was predicting the papacy would change hands back in 1950 or so. That's astounding. And, of course, a lot of people realized that on pages 57 and 58 of Petrus Romanus, we actually made that claim, and it did come to pass. So that has really invigorated our book.
Yes, and, of course, had a new pope, probably unusual, although a Latin ancestry, Roman. He came from Argentina. But, Brother Tom, how does the new pope fit into this prophecy?
Yeah, well, again, this is startling. And first I should say, we really wrestled with the idea of whether we should write a book that seemed to support a prophecy from an extra-biblical source, because it kind of goes against our evangelical mindset. But there did seem to be, and does seem to be, something very strange going on with this prophecy. Either that it was divinely inspired, or that it was demonically inspired, or there's a third option, and that is that for some reason the cardinal electors have for hundreds of years been following this thing like a road map and only picking popes that in one way or another could be seen as fulfilling this prophecy. So a lot of people thought when Petrus Romanus finally came along that this would be a cardinal who had the Christian name Peter, so they could think of him as Peter the Roman. And we have been cautioning all this last year. We're on all kinds of shows, television, radio shows, saying that the new pope does not have to have the name Peter. All he would need to be is of Italian descent. Well, then, lo and behold, we get a new pope. His parentage on both sides is of Italian descent, which makes him a Roman. And then, of course, the name Peter could be satisfied simply because he holds the Petrine or office of Peter. He sits upon the throne of Peter. So you had the first Peter, now you have the last Peter sitting on the same throne, who happens to be of Roman descent, so he can be thought of as Peter the Roman. But actually it gets better, and let me make this just very quick, these 3 points. Secondly, he names himself after Francis Assisi, and Francis Assisi was, his original name was Francesco di Pietro, or Peter de Bernatoni, and he was an Italian, a man whose name could literally be translated Peter the Roman. Secondly, Francis Assisi is also the man who prophesied that at the end of time there would be a false pope, a man who would take the pontificate, who is actually under the control of Satan. In fact, he called him a destroyer. So it's extraordinary that the new pope named himself after this man. And then thirdly, we had always said that the term Petrus Romanus all that really implies is this would be a pope who would affirm the Romanism of the Roman Catholic religion. In other words, he would hold that the Pope and the Roman Catholic religion is superior to all other Christian leadership and all other churches in the world. And lo and behold, this Pope is the first ever Jesuit. And we didn't see that coming, but the Jesuits, that's what they're under oath to do, to stop Protestantism and to promote the Pope as the spiritual head of all of the religious populations of the world.
I understand the Pope, or the religious leader of the old Byzantine section, or East Rome, is also meeting with the Pope. Now, if they would unite, then the Catholic Church would be united again as one body.
Well, that's right, and plus the fact that you now have Time magazine has a picture of the new Pope Francis, and right over the top it says One World Pope. You have major religious publications that are evangelical publications, Protestant publications, saying that this Pope is now the Pope of all Christians, including Protestants. And then, as Chris Putnam's research has shown, even Malachi Martin had written about how the Jesuits were predisposed to this kind of a takeover of the papacy.
Yeah, actually, I have Malachi Martin's book. This was really the first book when he was released from his vow of silence to go out and become an author when he moved to New York. The first book that he wrote is called The Jesuits, The Society of Jesus, and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church. This was his first major work once he left Rome and moved to New York City. Now, I'm just going to read the first paragraph, just a little snippet, just so you can hear the thesis of what Malachi Martin was saying in the late 1980s. Quote, "A state of war exists between the papacy and the religious order of the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, to give the order its official name. The war signals the most lethal change to take place within the professional ranks of the Roman Catholic clergy over the last 1,000 years. And, as with all important events in the Roman Catholic Church, it involves the interest and lives and the destinies of ordinary men and women in the millions." So Malachi Martin said that there was a war between the Jesuits and the papacy, and that he expected that to just grow more intense. So what does it mean that now we have the first Jesuit pope in history? Well, that seems to imply to me, at the very least, that the Jesuits won that war.
Yes, we remember Malachi Martin quite well. He was on our program quite often, bringing us news about world religion and the Roman Catholic Church. He would always say, "Oh, Brother Noah, they don't make them like you and me anymore." I can still hear him. But concerning the last pope, what do other Catholic mystics or prognosticators have to say about the last pope?
Well, many of them, including Malachi Martin, believed. In fact, Martin also wrote a book called The Final Conclave. And Martin believed that there was a Luciferian effort, a plot, a dark plot that existed among some of the cardinals, and he also believed that it reached all the way down to the local diocese. And the purpose really behind it was the inception of a sorcerous spirit into a false cardinal who would eventually become the final prophet. But in Martin's mind, this was going to be the false prophet of biblical fame, the false prophet of the book of Revelation, which is described as a personality that has horns like a lamb, which speaks to us kind of right Christian symbolism. He's like a lamb. And yet it says he speaks as a dragon. So we know that there would be this religious figure that would have global influence, and yet he would be influenced by the dragon. He would be influenced by a satanic figure. And there have been Dr. Henry Manning, Dr. Salvador Zola, Dr. William Helley. These are all theologians for the Roman Catholic Church that for hundreds of years predicted that at the end of time, Rome would become apostate. The doctrines of the church, and many of the faithful Roman Catholics believe that this happened starting Vatican II. And you remember your old friend Malachi Martin, he was always bemoaning the changes that occurred following Vatican II that opened the door for a kind of ecumenism or New World type order that ultimately, in that book Chris was referring to a moment ago, the Jesuits and other works that Malachi Martin talked about, he believed that they were going to use the Vatican, or they were going to use the Roman Catholic Church and its millions of followers around the world as a machine for instituting the religious aspects of the New World Order.
Yes, Chris, how does the Malachi prophecy and what Brother Tom has been talking about, how does that match what is predicted to happen in the book of Revelation?
Well, Noah, I'm really glad you asked that because, there have been a lot of people out there that like to criticize Tom and myself for looking into this extra-biblical prophecy. We've never put this on the level of Scripture, and, really our point of interest in it is that it does seem to coincide with Scripture, and it seems to be suggestive of perhaps when, in a broad range of time, that we might see the events in the book of Revelation. It's certainly not a date-setting scheme because, who knows how long a pope might be in office, and if something is making a prediction about historical events that will happen during his office, that could be a range of like 30 years or so. So it's certainly not anything like a date-setting scheme, and we've never tried to represent this anything like the authority of Scripture. But, one thing I would point out is that in the letter to the Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul wrote to that church. I'll read just from the King James Bible here. It says, "Quench not the spirit, despise not prophesying, prove all things, and hold fast to what is good." Now, Paul seems to be telling us not to despise prophesying, but to test them to see what is good. So, my point of interest with this Malachi prophecy is this last prophecy. Because it says, "In the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, and he will nurse his sheep in many tribulations, but when they are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people." So how does that seem to coincide with Bible prophecy? Well, obviously, we see the word tribulations in there, so that seems to be implying what we would call the Great Tribulation. But when it says the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, now, that's a very transparent reference to the city of Rome. Rome is classically known as the city of 7 hills. Even the Catholic Encyclopedia identifies Rome as the city of 7 hills. Now, when you look at Revelation chapter 17, it talks about Mystery Babylon, the great harlot. Now, there have been hundreds of Protestant biblical scholars who have identified that great harlot as the Roman Catholic Church. Without pressing on that metaphor real hard, I think that it's crystal clear to me that it's talking about the city of Rome. Whether you want to press it onto Catholicism or not is up to you. But when you see in the middle of the chapter, it's talking about a 7-headed beast. Now, that the heads of that beast have 2 aspects. It's not a either or, it's a both and. It says that the 7 heads that you saw are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And then it goes into the thing about the 7 kings. So the first aspect is 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. So that seems to imply the 7-hilled city that we see in the Malachi prophecy. But to me, the dead ringer, and this is really, I think, just makes it crystal clear. At the end of Revelation 17, it says, "That woman that you saw is that great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth." Now, when John was writing the book of Revelation, most biblical scholars date that around AD 90, and no one disputes that it's, in the 1st century. And so this is at the peak of the Roman Empire. Okay, so if we're going to base our interpretation of the Bible on what the original author intended, and that, I think that's the most sound way to interpret the Bible, what did John mean when he used those words? When he said that great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth, his context was the peak of the Roman Empire. There really was no competition for the city of Rome. So I think that that's just a real clear reference that the woman, the great harlot, is the city of Rome in Revelation 17. Now, whether that encompasses a lot more, now that we're in the end times, now that 2,000 years have gone by and Rome really has spread its influence all around the world, and they have, people in all the governments of all the world, and, they have their own seat in the United Nations. But, I mean, there's, if you were going to name a religious system that matches this great harlot that's centered in Rome, it's really hard to come to any other conclusion other than Roman Catholicism. And, for that reason, we see this Malachi prophecy says the city of seven hills is destroyed. Now, when a Catholic if a Catholic was making up some propaganda or creating some kind of prophecy, you would not expect a Catholic to make up something that predicts the judgment of Rome. To me, the fact that this comes from a Catholic source, that is a mark of authentication, because people don't usually make things up that embarrass them or aren't favorable to them. So in that way, it really does seem to be forecasting the events of Revelation 17 and 18, which speaks of the judgment of this great harlot mystery Babylon system.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being with us on the program today. But on the broadcast tomorrow, we're going to talk about...
On today's broadcast, authors Tom Horn and Chris Putnam visit with Brother Hutchings about their new book, Exo Vaticana, a volume that delves into intriguing information about the Vatican. Brother Tom and Brother Chris are both students of prophecy, and they are excellent writers, giving themselves to thorough research. Brother Hutchings, what about their new book?
Thank you, Brother Jerry. It's a tremendous book that you're going to be interested in. In fact, one I am interested in. But which one of you gentlemen would like to tell us what this new book is all about?
Well, I'd be willing to start out. Hey, Noah, this is Chris. Noah, on the cover of this book, Exo Vaticana, you see a flying saucer over St. Peter's Basilica. It looks like it's shooting a beam of light down on it. It looks like something right out of a science fiction movie. I'm sure that there will be plenty of folks standing in line to criticize Tom Horn and myself for capitalizing on making a sensationalistic cover on our book and whatnot. But, what they don't realize, and what I'm going to try to anticipate and perhaps educate them a little bit before they do that, is that what you see on the cover of that book absolutely happened according to reliable sources, and not just once, but many times. One of the most, I think, dramatic, easy-to-prove times happened in 1978. That was the year of 3 popes. And what happened then was Paul VI died, and then John Paul I was pope for only 33 days, and then John Paul II was elected pope. Well, right in the middle of that 33-day papacy, there was a massive UFO flap over the city of Rome, so much so that it even made the New York Times. And, this wasn't just a little light in the sky. These were police officers, there was military officials, guards at the Vatican. They all reported seeing a huge triangular craft and a donut-shaped craft that was shooting a beam of green light down. We're not making this stuff up. I found the New York Times article, and actually you have a copy of that in front of you right now. This happened in 1978, and, it happened to coincide right at this time with an unprecedented series of events with the papacy. You had 3 popes in 1 year. That hardly ever happens. And then 2 weeks after the peak of this UFO flap is when John Paul I died mysteriously, and, a lot of people claimed he was killed, that he was poisoned. So there was all sorts of spiritual warfare and strange events going on, and we see UFOs all over the sky. So the book Exo Vaticana, that's not just about that, but I just wanted to address the cover of the book. The book itself, it handles, the Catholic Church has said a lot of things about belief in extraterrestrials. They've endorsed this. They've endorsed basically the naturalistic idea of creation, where they believe in Darwinism, and they believe this has happened on other planets. So our book, it covers that. It covers the theology involved in that. It covers the UFO phenomenon in a general way. It covers the idea of alien abductions, of hybrids that's happened in the ancient world up until possibly in our modern era as well. I address the science of astrobiology. That's the study of life in space, the combination of astronomy and biology. It's really interesting that you can get a PhD in that. And the Vatican had an astrobiology conference in 2009 in Rome. They sponsored this. They had the top secular scientists in the world come to Rome to discuss life in space. So the basis for our book is grounded in reality, firmly. And some of the ideas that we're talking about are fantastic, but it's firmly grounded in evidence and real-life situations.
And I would add to that, Noah, that I was very happy that Chris was willing to join me again. We wrote Petrus Romanus together, which became a best-selling book. And, of course, now that the Pope stepped down like we predicted he would, we've had people from all over the world wanting us to do television and radio. But like I said on the first program that we did with you, all these shows we were doing, people kept calling in saying, what do you make of the Vatican's astronomers and their spokespersons being out there talking about aliens and how they are our space brothers? And they started out talking about how they wanted to baptize aliens, but then later they changed that and said the aliens are actually going to be coming here to baptize us, and then it might require a change in Christianity or in doctrine as we've understood it. Well, we wanted to get to the bottom line. We wanted to find out where in the world are these guys coming from with this line of thinking. And so at the very beginning of our investigation, we decided to go where the horse's mouth is. We decided, Chris and I, to travel to Mount Graham in Arizona, where the Vatican has a famous observatory on the top of that mountain. It's only 1 hour away from Tucson, Arizona, on one of the highest mountains, considered one of the most holiest mountains by the American Indians, where the Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope is located. We decided we were going to go there. We were going to talk to the Jesuits that run it. We were going to go to the 2 other telescopes that are on top of that mountain, including the large binocular telescope, which is the largest of its kind in the world. And so we did. We went there. We spent the whole day. We visited with the Jesuit who was on duty that day. Afterward, we got a hold of Brother Guy Cosmonolgo, who's one of the leading astronomers in the world for the Vatican, asked him very pointed questions, and if we get a chance on this show to tell you some of the stuff they told us, I think it'll blow you away. But that's what this book grew out of. That's what Exo Vaticana grew out of, was the startling information we actually received from the Vatican's top astronomers.
I did not know that the Vatican had this observatory in Arizona, and I wondered, now that I've learned exactly, why would they do that? Of course, we know that all Christians have an interest in heaven, but a little history and a little knowledge about the planets and everything, to such an extent they have a huge observatory in Arizona. But evidently it's for additional observation in space, maybe associated with angelic travel. Now, Chris mentioned the news article on December 18, 1978, about a massive UFO invasion of Italy. This says UFOs light up skies in Italy. It actually happened. There is an observatory in Arizona operated by the Vatican.
Yeah, and Noah, your old friend, Malachi Martin, he was once asked by Art Bell on the Coast to Coast show, I think this was in the 90s, he was asked, why does the Vatican have an observatory on top of Mount Graham in Arizona, and what is their interest in the study of deep space? And Malachi Martin's answer basically ignited a firestorm, because what he said was this. He said, it's because at the highest levels of the governance at the Vatican, they know what is approaching the earth and that it will be of the utmost importance in coming years. So Malachi Martin, who was a Jesuit, he was the personal secretary to Augustine B. He was a close personal friend of John Paul. Here was a guy that was a formidable polyglot. He could speak 12 languages. He worked inside the Vatican translating the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this was no Johnny-come-lately who would have just been making stuff up, right? I mean, he was really a guy in the know. He had access to the third Secrets of Fatima. There's not a handful of people in the world that ever read the final Secrets of Fatima. And yet when they they asked him that, he said they've got that observatory there because they are watching what is approaching the earth. Now, when we went there, by the way, we asked Brother Cosmonologo what he made of Malachi Martin, and he actually seemed to be miffed at Malachi Martin because Malachi Martin was letting the cat out of the bag on some stuff that they didn't want being talked about publicly. Well, that's no big secret with your old friend Malachi, is it? But he seemed upset by that. But right next door to that telescope is the large binocular telescope. Now, one of the things Chris could even speak to is he did research on the consortium of astronomers that use the top of that mountain and that have access to all three of those telescopes. Well, the large binocular telescope has a specific instrument in it, and guess what? It's named the Lucifer device. And that's the most powerful device they have to use infrared to look back into the farthest reaches of time and distance and space from atop Mount Graham. So what are they doing there, right? Why would they have a device called the Lucifer instrument if they're monitoring something, according to Malachi Martin, that is approaching the earth? What are they looking at?
You know, the astronaut Gordon Cooper made a statement that it's kind of shocking. So here's a NASA astronaut, one of our heroes from the space program, and I'll just quote him. Quote, "You want to know about UFOs and little green men? Contact the Vatican. They have an observatory in Arizona, and that's what they're looking for," end quote.
Now, you gentlemen cover all this in your new book, right? Yes. And I would think our listeners are certainly going to want a copy of it. But you mentioned that this mountain has something to do with the belief of the Indians. What about that? What do they believe about this mountain?
Well, Chris and I both studied that issue, and first of all, Mount Graham is one of the four holiest mountains to the American Indian, the Native American Indian peoples. And in Arizona, especially the Apache tribe, they actually tried to file a lawsuit. They got involved with environmentalists and anybody else who would join their cause. They tried to stop the Vatican from building this telescope on the top of their mountain. Ultimately, the telescope got built, obviously. But partly why they wanted to stop it is because for them, Mount Graham is what you and I in modern lingo might refer to as a stargate, a portal. It's a holy place that they believe other dimensional realities can move in and out of our reality from that location. Now, the people listening to this think that that's maybe an astonishing thought, and yet it has some basis in biblical reality. There are multiple stories in the Bible where people went up onto the tops of mountains. Moses meets with God on Mount Sinai. When Jesus returns, his feet are going to touch the top of the Mount of Olives. The ancient book of Enoch tells us that the watchers first descended on Mount Hermon and then walked down into the Valley of the Plains. So there's this ancient idea that the tops of mountains, there could be locations where if our eyes were open and we could see into this other reality, might be a place. Well, remember, as a matter of fact, when Nimrod built the tower, he built it specifically, he said, so that its height would reach into Shamayim, the dwelling place of God. And what did the Lord say? The Lord said, let's go down and see what they're doing. And he says, they will accomplish what they have imagined to do. What did they imagine to do? To build a tower whose top would reach literally into the dwelling place of God. And all of the ancient literature, including the Jewish encyclopedia, say that Nimrod could see into heaven. He could see this was a place. So he built the tower specifically at a place where it would allow him to enter into heaven. Well, whether that's true or not, that's what the Apache believe about Mount Graham, and it causes you to wonder why, of all these mountains, the Vatican would have specifically been targeting that place. In fact, one more thing, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but in their creation myth, the Apache say that in the time before time, a large silvery disk descended from the heavens, and in it sat a bearded man, the Creator, and he started creating everything. And then they said another man came, but he was actually a dragon in the form of a man, and he brought deception. And when you look into their mythos, it sounds like they're very much repeating an awful lot of what we believe about ancient history. That's why they're upset about the Vatican being up there, as it's a holy location to them, a portal through which things can come that sound like UFOs.
Now, of course, the Vatican is evidently on the observatories you bring out are observing the heavens. You mentioned UFOs over the Vatican. That's part of what this book is all about. But what are they expecting? An angelic invasion like happened when the angels came down and cohabited with women before the flood?
Well, we talked to Guy Cosmonalgo, and the illustrations he gave us about the coming saviors, he pulled right from the story of the Nephilim. We went to the observatory. When we left, we talked to the Jesuit who was on duty there. When we left, we wanted to contact the top source at the Vatican, which is Brother Guy Cosmonalgo. This is the astronomer that oversees the Pope's private collection of meteorites. He splits his time between Gandolfo, Italy, where the Pope's summer residence is, where they have a telescope over there, and the one in Arizona. And he agreed to be interviewed by us. So when we posed this question, because now we're taking a giant leap forward in the book, because early in the book we established the fact that many of the Jesuits believe that there are extraterrestrial intelligences. They are morally superior to us. And as a matter of fact, they will be coming here to evangelize us, not the other way around. And it's going to require a change to our doctrine as we have understood it, because our revelation hasn't been complete. So these alien saviors are coming here to complete our revelation. So, with that in mind, when we specifically asked Brother Cosmonalgo, where in the Bible would you find any reference to these saviors you're talking about, these ETs, he pointed us to Genesis 6 and told the story of the angels that came down. And this ancient story says they brought knowledge, the knowledge of heaven. They taught men craft. They taught them metallurgy. They taught them all these different things. So that's their way of comparatively saying these advanced aliens are going to come and increase our level of knowledge. But this left Chris and I scratching our head, because we're saying, but wait a minute, these were fallen angels, these were demonic, they actually corrupted the human genetic bloodline and ultimately led to the judgment of God and the great flood. Well, when we brought that question back to him, let me just read you real quickly what he said here. It's a very short line. He said, perhaps it's not so far-fetched to see the second person of the Trinity, the Word, who was present in the beginning, coming to lay down his life and take it up again, not only as the Son of Man, but also as a child of these other races, end quote. So then we emailed him back and said, really? You're saying that the Immaculate Conception, the birth of Jesus Christ, was actually an abduction event, that Jesus is a star child of an alien race, and that's why what we think of as virgin birth was actually an abduction phenomenon? And this is what they believe. So it's an extraordinary point that we find that the Jesuits are in now, and Opus Dei level theologians for the church who are crafting doctrine right now that we think is actually going to even lead eventually to a papal decree, because Jose Funes, another astronomer for the church, says that to not believe in the aliens and be willing to accept their doctrine, that's the real heresy, because he said it puts limits on God's creative ability. So we're moving into a period of time now the world has never seen before.
You know, Tom, just to add something to that, you know, the sorts of things that these Jesuit astronomers and theologians have said in public are so sensational that there's absolutely no need that for Tom Horn and myself to make any of this up, because the things that they've said right out in public are fantastic enough to just to curl your eyebrows. Now, this Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope facility went online on top of Mount Graham. It was the first one built up there, and it went online in 1993. Now, right before it went into operation, the leader of the Vatican Observatory Research Group, Father George Cognier, actually gave a bunch of interviews to the media, and in the London Daily Telegraph, a conservative newspaper in the UK, dated October 28, 1922, there was an article, and it's titled, "Vatican Sets Evangelical Sights on Outer Space." Now, I'm going to read a little snippet from this article. This is just in their own words, his own interview. The Roman Catholic Church is to team up with America's space agency to look for life in outer space and spread the gospel to extraterrestrials. Jesuit priests who run the Vatican Observatory near Rome say they are joining forces with the U.S. NASA agency to hunt for UFOs and signs of life on planets and solar systems similar to Earth's. NASA's job will be to monitor for alien communication signals. The Vatican, which has helped to build a new reflector telescope in Tucson, Arizona, would help search for planets displaying conditions for life. Should intelligent life be found, Father Cognier said, the Church will be obliged to address the question of whether extraterrestrials might be brought within and the fold and baptized. So there it is in their own words, and it just sounds completely sensational. And like I said, you would expect this to be in the National Enquirer or something, but this was in a conservative paper. It was represented as an accurate, factual article, and since then, there have been several other, Father Guy Cosmonago, who Tom mentioned, Funes, several of the other Jesuit astronomers had made similar statements about baptizing ETs. In fact, I would challenge your listeners, just go to your favorite search engine and type the word baptized extraterrestrial into your search engine, hit search, and you're going to get hundreds of hits, and you're going to see these Jesuit priests talking about this.
Yeah, but it goes to the idea that that's why the Vatican Observatory was built. That's what it was built for, according to one of the original people involved in its construction. It was built to search for advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. And when we were there, we asked the Jesuit on duty that day if that is what the Vatican was using that telescope for, and he confirmed that, in fact, that's what they use it for. It's the search for astrobiology, for exoplanets. The other thing, Brother Hutchings, is I know at one time when you were very young, you saw a UFO, and one of the things that startled us about the top of that mountain was how commonly they refer to their instrumentation constantly picking up UFOs in deep space. And as soon as I heard them talking about that, I thought back about, well, this is long before 1947. Noah Hutchings had seen something like this, and we got your testimony and put it in the book.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us again on the broadcast today. And
Brother Tom and Chris have appeared on numerous radio and television programs about their explosive revelations on the Roman Catholic Church, and what they've written and said is intriguing, to say the least. Brother Hutchings, what exactly is Exo-Vaticana about?
Thank you, Brother Jerry. The new book is an examination of certain Vatican beliefs and how all this fits into the prophetic scenario for the last days. What is astrobiology?
Well, Noah, astrobiology is really the combination of two sciences, astronomy and biology. Now, astronomy is the study of outer space, and biology is the study of life. So they created this new science, ostensibly to study life in space. Now, you can go to various universities and get a scientific degree in astrobiology, but the thing that I find kind of remarkable is, as far as we know, there really isn't any life in space. So isn't it interesting that you can go get a PhD and have nothing at all to study? I find that pretty amazing. But, astrobiology is interesting in a number of ways, and one of the things that I wrote about in our new book, Exo-Vaticana, is that it's really founded on a worldview that is antithetical to the Bible, a worldview that is not consistent with what we see in Scripture. The whole fundamental founding principle is something they call the Copernican principle. Now, Copernicus was the astronomer who said that the Earth is not the center of the solar system. And, that's not very controversial these days, but what astronomers, they extrapolated from that and say the Earth is not a very special planet. It's just one amongst many. Now, they've discovered a whole lot of new planets outside of our solar system. They have a list of around 600 or so right now of what they call exoplanets. So this Copernican principle, it's one of the assumptions driving this project, and it says that Earth is not special. Now, from that, they took it a little further, and most astronomers they believe what they call the principle of mediocrity. Now, this takes it a lot further. It says that not only is the Earth not in a special location, it's just a mediocre example of one of many planets that are probably just like it. So, this is an assumption that says that there's a lot of other planets like Earth. And, from that, they extrapolate. See, they believe that life just popped into being on Earth by accident. If you have some water and it's the right temperature and the right molecules just happen to run into each other, then life just kind of pops into being, and then through the process of Darwinian evolution, it evolved into us. So from the goo to you via the zoo. And that's really what they form their worldview on. So astrobiology, they just take those assumptions and they say because there's all these other planets out there, it's just inevitable that life evolved there too. And, probably earlier than here, so they're probably smarter than us. So, it's fundamentally founded on a worldview that is opposed to the biblical revelation that tells us that the earth is a very special place, that God, created man with good intentions, that he created us in a perfect garden to be in relationship with him, and that man is special. I think one of the key things that we have to look at is Jesus Christ incarnated as a human being, as a man. To me, the fact that Jesus is a man tells me that humans are very special. And, so any of these ideas that are trying to undermine, the exceptional status of human beings and, the exceptional status of the incarnation are fundamentally anti-Christian in their complete worldview.
Well, thank you, Chris. Now, we've already referred in reference to your new book, which is just out over 600 pages, Exo Vaticanus, about what is happening in Rome. Does Rome really believe in the Catholic Church? And there's going to be aliens, and it's going to affect the world and the gospel. What happened in the aftermath of the reports of UFOs over Italy in 1978?
Well, no, as far as the aftermath, I don't really know. I mean, as far as I know, a lot of these stories, they happen, and then they just kind of get conveniently swept under the rug of history, and nobody talks about them in polite conversations anymore. I mean, one of the things that, a lot of people aren't aware of, most people are aware of movies like Independence Day, right, where you have these huge spaceships over the cities and everyone's standing with their mouth gaping open looking up, and you're thinking, wow, if that ever happens, it's going to change everything. Well, from my research, that has happened, okay? It's happened more than once. In Phoenix, Arizona, there's a thing called the Phoenix Lights, a sighting that happened over Phoenix in the 1990s, and it was witnessed by probably thousands of people, and a lot of the people that describe it say it was a mile-wide craft, something like this, something they'd never seen anything like it in their life. Now, and we're not talking about just average citizens. At the time, the governor of the state, Fife Symington, at the time he kind of made fun of the whole thing because he was the acting governor. But a few years later, he came out and admitted that he did that just trying to relieve the tension because people were really scared. People were terrified. And he had a press conference where he kind of dressed up a guy in an alien suit, and they made fun of the whole thing. But then a few years later, he came out and admitted that he personally saw the craft. This is the governor of Arizona. He was an Air Force officer, so he knows what he's looking at when he looks up in the sky. And in the interviews, he published a statement in a book by Leslie Kean called UFOs, Generals, and Air Force Officials or something like that. It's full of testimony by qualified witnesses who have seen things like this. Now, Governor Fife Symington said that this thing was like nothing he had ever seen and that he just couldn't imagine that it was anything of this world. So stuff like Independence Day actually has happened. Why is it so, swept under the rug? Why does nobody talk about it? Well, it really seems that to me that the power elite, the people that have a vested interest in controlling things, they put a taboo on the subject. They have a thing where it's embarrassing. Like you'll get made fun of. People will call you crazy. These are the sorts of things that you don't dare talk about in public because you'll be a nut. But the thing is, there are people that are demonstrably not crazy, that are reliable witnesses who have seen very fantastic things. And, I think it's absolutely real, but it's just, it's not exactly safe or polite to talk about it in, certain circles. But the fact that it's happening is, it's really not even debatable. It's a fact.
I understand the Pope at Rome saw a UFO in 19 1950, and do either one of you know anything about that, and did it change Catholic beliefs about the end of the age, or did it have any effect at all?
Well, no, you're wearing me out with all the questions on my material. But, yeah, this actually, a lot of Catholics talk about the Fatima miracle of the sun, and this is the famous event that happened in Fatima, Portugal in 1917. What you aren't told, everyone talks about, they associate this with the Virgin Mary, but, the thing that they saw in the sky had nothing to do with Mary. Most of the descriptions of what they saw was a great disk spinning around in the sky, shooting off different colors. Now, they call this the miracle of the sun, but it really didn't have anything to do with the sun. The sun does not move in the sky. I mean, the sun is a huge star. The gravity alone would destroy the earth if the sun started moving around. So obviously what they saw was a ball or a disk that moved around in the sky, and, they call it the miracle of the sun. But what you asked about is an unknown fact that most people are not aware of that coincides with this story. And it really indicates to me that these UFOs have an influence on the Catholic Church that most people are unaware of. And this is the kind of information that our book uniquely presents. You're not going to find this anywhere else. But Pope Pius XII, he was the Pope that authenticated the Fatima miracle. He was the Pope during World War II. So in 1950, he was thinking about promulgating a new doctrine. And so just to give you an idea of how kind of wacky the doctrines about Mary are, I mean, they're still making up new ones, 2,000 years later. So this is the doctrine called the Assumption of Mary. He was thinking about that. It was kind of a legend that Mary ascended into the heavens, just like Jesus did in the book of Acts. Well, while he was thinking about that out in the Vatican gardens in 1950, Pope Pius saw an opaque spear moving and spinning in the sky from left to right, the same sort of thing that people saw in Fatima, Portugal. Now, of course, it didn't say anything about Mary, had nothing to do with Mary. He sees a disc spinning in the sky above Rome, and he associates that to Mary in his mind, and he took that as his inspiration to define the doctrine of the Assumption. And, just a few days later, he promulgated that as a doctrine that all Catholics are bound to believe. You have an infallible Pope, dictating the doctrine of the Assumption of Mary based on a UFO sighting.
Brother Tom, what are some of the things that Jesuit astronomers have written about how the gospel will be changed when the aliens arrive? What do they mean by alien?
Yeah, well, of course, this is one of the central topics in this book. It's what drove us to go to the Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope. It's why we wanted to talk to the Jesuits, because we were trying to get behind what's working behind some of these comments that they're making in the public, where they're talking about the aliens as our brothers, and then some of the stuff that was getting scarier, where they're talking about how they're going to arrive. Well, I'll just give you a quote, actually. Father Giuseppe Tanzella Nitti, this is an Opus Dei level theologian for the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome, so it doesn't get much higher than this. And he actually argues in a recent theological treatise that has been written for the Pope's Academy, something that they can use to develop dogma around. He's written how, when the spiritual ETs arrive, it is not going to be immediately obligatory for Christians to renounce their faith in God simply on the basis of the reception of new, unexpected information of a religious character from extraterrestrial civilizations. I'm actually reading this from his report right now. But that such a renunciation could come soon after, as the new religious content originating from outside the earth is confirmed as reasonable and credible. Let me continue quoting. Once the trustworthiness of the information has been verified, the believer would have to reconcile such new information with the truth that he or she already knows and believes on the basis of the revelation of the one triune God, conducting a re-reading of the gospel inclusive of the new data, end quote. So talk about terrifying theology that's being developed. And again, we had to question, why would they feel pressured now to have to start actually developing a new form of theology that would be accommodating to a dynamic ET reality? And that's just one of the quotes from an Opus Dei level professor for the Pope's University in Rome.
According to scriptures relating to the tribulation period and the last days, there's going to be a great deception. You think UFO activity is related to this great deception?
Well, I think UFO activity certainly could play a role. I mean, just imagine, 2 Thessalonians 2:9 says that the coming of the Antichrist will be accompanied with lying signs and wonders. Luke tells us in Luke 21:11 that there would be fearful sights and great signs in the heavens. The Bible also tells us that men's hearts will fail them for fear, for seeing those things that are coming upon the earth. So there's reasons to believe that there could be something that kind of goes along with the first show that we did on this subject, where Chris Putnam was saying that you almost need something that would stop the world in its tracks. What Ronald Reagan talked about years ago, how all of the world would suddenly come together if they were facing some universal threat from a source outside of this world. By the way, General MacArthur said the same thing. He said the next war won't be fought on terrestrial terms. It'll be a war against people from another planet, he said. So you have to ask yourself, what do these highly placed figures who have access to, dark information that the public is never made aware of, what is it that they see? What did Malachi Martin refer to as something is approaching the earth that's going to be of the utmost importance? And why do these theologians now suddenly feel the need to develop theology that will be accommodating to an alien savior, an alien race, and even saying that it's going to cause the origination of information from outside of this world that will cause us to have to reread the gospel and accommodate this new reality? They're certainly behaving in a way that they know something that the public does not know. And don't forget this, Corrado Balducci, he only died just a few years ago. He was the official spokesman for the Vatican concerning the reality of aliens and UFOs. And Balducci went on Italian television. You can watch it on YouTube and the translations on YouTube, in which he said that the Vatican was fully aware of a dynamic ET reality that is on Earth now. And he said they've been using their embassies around the world to collect information on the alien agenda. And this was a decade ago. Balducci, who only died 3 or 4 years ago, talking about, and what he said has never been refuted by the church, and he was the official spokesman for the church on the alien reality.
Tom, I have that right in front of me. Balducci said in that interview that the existence of these beings is a certainty that we cannot doubt. I mean, he was absolutely certain, and this is the sort of language that he used. Now, the other thing that I found, really troubling about Balducci is that, he's Monsignor Corrado Balducci. Now, the title Monsignor means that he had a special honor for the Pope. He was actually the lead exorcist for the Diocese of Rome. So for the city of Rome, if you had to have an exorcism, he was the go-to guy. So we're talking about someone who is an expert in demonology as far as Roman Catholic theology goes. Now, when we read the sorts of things associated with the alien abduction phenomenon, I mean, these things are patently evil. And, there's all kinds of secular researchers that think that there's some kind of alien hybrid program going on because of the sexual nature of some of this contact. So this stuff is, I think transparently demonic. Yet, Corrado Balducci gave interviews where he said that the alien phenomenon was not demonic and had nothing to do with demons. How can he make such a statement? I mean, anyone who has looked at the contactee literature, if you look at the sorts of things that people claim, who claim to have contact with aliens, right, it's completely New Age, anti-biblical. It really points to Eastern theology, this idea of all is one, pantheism, pantheistic monism, where you kind of meditate and all becomes one big hive mind sort of thing. This is the sort of ideas that these aliens are putting into the public consciousness. So for a high-level Vatican demonologist to make such a statement is really, it just amazes me. He just is turning a blind eye to so much evidence to the contrary. And I just wanted to state it really clearly so none of the listeners are vague about this. Our opinion on this is not that these are aliens. We've talked a lot about the words aliens and extraterrestrials and all that. We really think that, a large portion of this phenomenon is the activity of fallen angels, of, demonic manifestations. And, if you look in the New Testament, in Ephesians chapter 2, it refers to the devil as the prince of the power of the air. Now, when you get to Ephesians chapter 6, Paul says that we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. Now, I did some study of the worldview of the New Testament. What did the Jews during this period of time believe? What did the apostles believe? And they really believed that the demonic realm was the atmosphere above the earth, between the earth and the moon. So it really is not too big of a surprise to me that we see entities perpetrating a deception. Now, my thesis is that these craft, these UFOs that look like technology, are largely a ruse. It's something really meant to steer people into believing that this is high technology from another world, because the sorts of things that we see don't really make sense. People report seeing craft of all different sizes and shapes. I mean, for these to really be space aliens, they would have to be like developing a new ship every week, because none of them hardly ever look the same. And it really has every appearance of being some sort of fabricated, illusory camouflage. So I really think that it's great deception that's being perpetrated on the population. And in America right now, 58% of Americans believe in space aliens on other worlds. And, according to the latest statistics I'm looking at, 48% believe they've already visited the Earth. In the United Kingdom, they just did a survey that says more people believe in ET than God. Okay? Get that straight. United Kingdom surveys say more people believe in aliens than believe in God. So whether or not this is the final manifestation or not, the strong delusion is here now.
And let me add to that just very quickly something, Noah, if I can, before we run out of time. We actually conclude in this book that the Vatican, and they may be doing this unknowingly or unawares, but we believe that they're playing into the hands of a great deception. And we think that Daniel the prophet may have even foresaw this, because here's what it says in Daniel 11:38 through 39. He's talking about the God that the Antichrist will point the world to. And here's what he says: in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not he shall honor with gold and silver and precious and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. Now, what's important about this is in the original languages, this phrase, the God of forces, is connected to Baal Shamim, which was literally the Lord of the heavens, and in his second reference to the deity as a strange God, in the Hebrew that can literally be rendered with an alien God. And so Daniel warns that the Antichrist is going to point the world towards a God which the Hebrew text can literally translate as an alien God.
I think our listenership will want a copy of the new book by Brother Putnam and Brother Horn, Exo Vaticana. Fascinating book, and Brother Jerry is going to come now and tell you how you can get a copy.
Thanks, Brother Hutchings. There are 3 ways to get Exo Vaticana: telephone, mail, or the Internet. Phone number to call, 1-800-652-1144. Our mailing address is Southwest Radio Ministries, P.O. Box 100, Bethany, Oklahoma, 73008. And the website address is swrc.com. The 608-page book plus a complimentary DVD library will be sent as our gift in appreciation of your $25 contribution in the U.S., $35 in Canada. In this explosive book, Brother Tom's and Brother Chris' investigation into what the Vatican believes about extraterrestrials goes into high gear. What they found in their exhaustive research surprised even them. No doubt you, too, will be blown away by the startling revelations. Call, write, or visit the website right away to get your copy of Exo Vaticana, along with the DVD library. The 3 programs in this mind-boggling series are also available. Got them on 2 CDs for an offering of $17 in the U.S., $18 in Canada. Phone 1-800-652-1144. The website address is swrc.com. While you're at it, ask for complete details on the Columbus, Ohio Prophecy Conference in July. Coming next over most of these stations is today's Bible in the News report. Next week, join us as Brother Hutchings and his daughter Carol Rushton begin a series of programs on Brother Hutchings' newest book, The Christian Cleansing of America. You'll hear the co-authors on your Watchman on the Wall program of Southwest Radio Ministries.
In God the Father and Jesus Christ are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, and this I say, lest any man should beguile you with enticing words. Wisdom and knowledge, wouldn't you like more? What should you do? Colossians 2, 3, and 4. Spend time with God and with Jesus the Son. Don't be led astray by anyone. In God the Father and Jesus Christ are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, and this I say, lest any man should beguile you with enticing words. In God the Father and Jesus Christ are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, and this I say, lest any man should beguile you with enticing